Welcome back. So, a Canadian immigration consultant has warned some members of the Afrikaans community in South Africa against applying for asylum in the United States. Nicholas Avramis says making a refugee claim to the US or any other country impacts future applications to other countries, including Canada, which approves close to 18,000 work permit and permanent residency applications for South Africa. Avramis joins us in studio now. Nicholas, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And this is one of those hot potato conversations now, isn't it? You know, Afrikaans community members, can they apply for asylum in the US? And I believe that as an immigration consultant, you've actually gotten a lot of, or a few calls, obviously you can give me the data of that, a few calls saying, can you help me apply for asylum to move to the US?
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. We're Beaver Immigration's immigration consulting company. We mainly focus on Canada. We do some European visas on a case-by-case basis. But recently we have been receiving calls from members of predominantly the Afrikaans community asking questions about this new refugee and asylum policy that the U.S. has come out with, which is quite interesting for us. But, you know, refugee and asylum claims are part of immigration, okay, in any country. And they're really governed by the 1951 Refugee Convention Act, which says, that framework basically says that, you know, if you have a fear of prosecution or serious harm through torture and cruelty, you can make an asylum claim. And that's usually the framework globally for it. But one thing people don't understand is that when you make this claim or when you seek asylum or refugee status in any country, this will follow you for life. And what does that mean? Well, when you go to make an application for a visitor visa to the UK, study permit to Australia, immigration officials are going to ask you, have you been denied a visa? Have you applied for refugee status? And usually the threshold for immigration officers is to determine whether you can abide by your temporary visa and status, or whether you plan to return to your home country. Well, if you've made a refugee claim, you've declared that you want to leave your home country, in this case South Africa, and you plan to never return. So it's something that's going to follow you and something that you're going to always have to explain during your travels.
So, and now I'm interested in saying, when, you know, I'm an Afrikaans South African, an Afrikaner South African, and I've applied for this refugee status, let's assume I get it, right, in the US. And then a few years in, I want to travel to somewhere else and I want to get that visa application. What would, and you say it would be difficult to explain, right? What would then happen? So what would be required of me to then get past that? Is it possible?
It is possible, but it's something that needs to be explained. And let's back up for a second. This is a policy announcement that came out last month through an executive order, right? No program has been announced. We do not know the specifics. Will this lead to a green card? Will this lead to U.S. citizenship? How long will the processing time take? Look, we've all seen that things in the United States change every 4 years. New government comes in, the policy changes, the tenor changes. And again, we see this all the time in our practice. People being rejected for visas in Canada because they failed to note that they were refused for a visa before, or they did apply for refugee status. And they take that stuff very seriously. And when you make this type of claim, especially for a family that has young children, this will also be on the children's record, okay? So you have to be careful in terms of making these claims, and down the road you will have to answer for them. And if you fail to answer them, specifically in a country like Canada, and you fill out your paperwork wrong, you will get banned from that country for 5 years.
One of the things, and you say no program has been announced, and I think that's an interesting point that you raise, because essentially there really is no real route of getting that, I suppose, refugee status in the US as of now, because there is no program announced. But I'm keen in hearing about, I suppose, the generalized sort of process of actually applying for asylum seeking. And you know, is it really just as direct as, you know, calling Nicholas and then getting the status approved? I mean, it's a lengthy process, right? And am I correct in saying that it involves the United Nations processes in any way?
Well, I can tell you, from my perspective, the most difficult files in Canadian immigration and most immigration are refugee and asylum claims. they're not straightforward. There's a lot of work that has to go for them. In the Canadian context, you have to do what's called a basis of claim. And you have to prove that there's persecution, fear for your safety, whether it's based on race, culture, political affiliation, religious affiliation. It's not as straightforward as just filling out a form. You have to make the case. And most countries will take years to investigate your file.
Yeah, there's a lot to look at. And so I'm interested in hearing also about how many South Africans are actually wanting to move to Canada, because I know you do a lot of that. Share with us that data. So let's take the US and certainly the asylum seeking out of it, because at the same time, we do have a lot of South Africans wanting to leave the country, heading towards Canada. Who is in South Africa looking most attractive to Canada?
Well, let's look at the numbers. Data that was recently released since 2020 shows that about 18,000 South Africans have either gotten work permits or achieved permanent residency, okay? That doesn't include study permits and visitor visas and other types of sponsorship programs. The numbers did accelerate in 2023 among agriculture workers, healthcare workers, and tradespeople. And part of the reason they accelerated was in 2023, Canada came out with what we call category-based selection. Really what it is a critical skills list. So they were going in the pool of candidates based on points, and they were specifically drawing for healthcare workers, tech workers, but mostly healthcare workers. So in that healthcare category, it's about 37 occupations. So I can tell you in the past year or two, about 350 family physicians or GPs alone immigrated to Canada and achieved permanent residency status through the point system.
Yeah. And then if we go back to now this issue of those that call you and ask about their, saying they're part of the Afrikaans community and would like to move to the US. Have there been any successful processes? What do you say to them, and what does that conversation sound like, Nicholas?
We have to be honest with them and tell them, one, we do Canadian immigration, we can't help you with this. The second thing we tell them is that no details have been announced, and the details are critically important. And the third thing we tell them, is we're very honest with them in our phone conversations and emails, is that this is something you need to very carefully consider if you want to go through this process along with you and your family, because it could have serious ramifications for you.
What are the responses that you get when you ask why would you want to leave? Do you ask? I think it's a curiosity, right?
No, we don't. In terms of this new U.S. policy, we don't usually get into the why. The why is pretty consistent. But looking at immigration as a whole, people leave for a variety of reasons. They leave for jobs, they leave for family, spousal sponsorship. They just want to change the scenery, right? South Africans are adventurers by the end of the day, okay? South Africans are all over the world, and they want to go out and explore the world, right? It doesn't all have to be nefarious, but this thing with what the U.S. is doing, and this is really important for people to understand. When looking at a country like Canada, okay, they come out with altruistic immigration programs to try to attract the best and brightest people around the world because they want them in the country, they need them in the country, and they want them to assimilate, okay? This thing that's come out of the U.S., is it really altruistic? Do they really want you? Are they really trying to help people, the South African people? Or is this a political ploy, cheap political tricks?
Yeah. Look, to say this has been an interesting discussion, I think, is an understatement. Thank you so much, Nicholas.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, really good. And Nicholas Avramis there is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and essentially saying to us that making asylum claims comes with consequences. It does essentially put a mark on your record and will have to be explained every time one applies for a visitor visa to any other country.